Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Fran Racioppi. I'm the host of today's podcast, and we are a leadership collective of former special operations warriors, academics, business executives. We have had a lot of success and we have had a lot of failure. I'm here to share those lessons with you. And I say the second part about the failure today because that's what we're going to talk about. Like I said, I'm Fran Racioppi. I was a former U.S. Army. I'm the founder of FR6. I work with companies on their leadership development and talent management and making them better organizations. And failure is a big thing that we talk about. But before we get to today's topic, I want to go around the room. I want to introduce everybody. And let's start with Mike.
Mike Sorelli, founder of the Talent War Group, founder of EF Overwatch, which is an executive search and talent advisory, former, and retired Navy SEAL. And coming out of Austin, Texas. So my prayers are with everyone who went through the winter storm. Best wishes to you and your family on the recovery.
Hey, Tom, Rich, you.
Hey, pleasure to be here. I am Rich Diviney, former and retired Navy SEAL, and I've been working in the leadership and optimal performance space. Just released a book called The Attributes, and proud member of the Talent War Group, and served with Mike, which was cool. Good to be here.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Tom Hall, balancing out the Army people on this call. Former Army Ranger, currently a consultant, been advising and consulting with startups the last 6-7 years. Also very proud to be a member of the Talent War Group.
Hey everyone, I'm Nayara, and I'm very happy to be a marketing associate at EF Overwatch and Talent War Group. We're excited for this conversation to start.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Let's get to it. And Tom, you're absolutely right. We have to balance out our Navy brothers over here. So we got to keep it even. So maybe at the end, instead of giving an individual the key points for the day, maybe Naira can tell us who won. Was it the Army or was it the Navy?
I think, Fran, it's very important to point out that very rarely does the Army have the best hair, but for once, we can check that block. Just throwing that out there right now.
Well, you have to have hair in order to have the best hair.
To qualify. Yeah.
Watch yourselves. And Naira, remember who pays your who signs your paychecks. That's all I'm going to say.
All right. So the title of today's podcast was I Failed Today. Now what? And we promoted this thing around the last week or so, and we said, well, we all fail. But it's what we do after failure that separates elite performers from everybody else. It's the difference in how you think and how you act from the moment that you stand up and realize that you may have failed. And that starts with honesty and self-reflection and understanding and being true to yourself to say, I wasn't good enough. And that can be little things like I didn't run as much as I wanted to today. I didn't eat as healthy as I wanted to. I didn't put as much time into the briefing that I was supposed to give to my boss. But standing up, self-reflecting, being honest is the very first step to elite performance because you're not casting blame. You're not looking for some other reason why you didn't get there. And that's hard to do. That takes maturity as a leader. That takes time and that takes effort to stand up, look internally and say, today wasn't good. Now what am I going to do about it? Let's go to the group because I want to get their thoughts. We opened it up. Rich, what do we do about it?
Yeah, what a great topic. I was excited to be a part of this, Fran. And so for me, I'm really interested in the elemental things, right? The elemental behaviors, right? So for me, it starts with accountability. That accountability is the kind of the baseline here. And the reason why it starts for me with accountability is because I believe accountability is actually power. Because what accountability allows you to do is take control in an environment where even if you're not sure what happened or even who to blame. As soon as you decide to hold yourself accountable, you start taking control, at least in part of that environment, and you take control of the actions thereforth, right? So as a leader, that's why it's so important to hold yourself accountable, because you want to model the behaviors you want to see more of, and then also recognize and kind of reframe this idea of accountability as a positive thing versus some people might think of it as a negative thing and kind of be afraid to do it. But in fact, it's a very empowering, I think, position to be in.
Tom?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind, Fran, when I hear that, and I've referenced it before on previous podcasts, is I listened to a podcast a couple months ago that pointed out the majority of people who are doing very well in their jobs, in their careers, in their social life, or what have you, are often the people that are most critical of themselves. So the people that are sitting back saying, I've done a poor job in this, I've done a poor job here, I failed here, I need to get better here, here, and here. Those are the people that go on to see the most success, who are the most critical of themselves, identifying their issues and then solving them. The flip side of that, the people that are oftentimes not doing very well at their jobs are the people that are constantly praising themselves, not pointing out their failures, not pointing out their performance issues where they need to get better. So for me, a lot of this, what you're mentioning, Fran, when it comes down to failure is really using it to make yourself better and more successful. So that's really the first thing that comes to mind. If anybody else has anything else to add to that.
Yeah, I want to go, Mike, I want to go to you, and I want to talk about this concept that just came up with both Rich and Tom about the positive side of this, the empowerment that comes from standing up and being honest with yourself.
First off, I'd like to note that I've already failed like 20 times today. So, before we started this, we talked about how this, personally for me, this was a maturation process. When I failed when I was young, I'd point fingers, cast blame, or just say I didn't fail because I just didn't like the scrutiny. And I think as you get older, you understand that failure is part of life. I don't mind making failures. Do I like it? No, absolutely not. I don't mind making failures, but what I mind is making the same mistake twice, which means I didn't hold myself accountable. I didn't reflect, learn from it, and then change the way I operate or behave to prevent that from happening. When I make the same mistake twice, that's when I'm truly upset. But there were some great things that were brought up. Accountability by Rich. And I know you guys are probably starting to hear this, the word self-accountability. Accountability being, your boss is looking over your shoulder and making sure that you're doing the right things. But self-accountability is a trait that, again, what Tom said, you look at highly successful people, they are highly self-accountable. In the same token, they're also extremely reflective. And again, a younger me didn't reflect on my failures as much. I didn't focus on learning from them rather than dealing with the embarrassment of it. And as I've gotten older, I'm even looking back at the mistakes I made in my 20s as a sergeant in the Marine Corps or a young SEAL officer. So I think for some people, this really is a maturation thing. The older you get in life, I think naturally for good leaders, they become more reflective. And I couldn't agree more with Tom. The traits of self-accountability and self-reflection are two of the most admired traits I have for some of the best leaders I've ever worked with.
Mike, do you think there's an inflection point? So you mentioned, as you get older, as you mature, do you think you come to a point where there's you can put a fine point on that pencil and say, this is the point now where I know that I can accept this as failure and move on?
That is a tough question. And top of mind, I don't know. I think that's part of the life process is you're continually reflecting all the way until you're in the grave. I've reflected over some of the same incidents. I'll be honest, things that happened on the battlefield, and I know it's the same for you guys, decisions you made may have impacted lives. And I still go back and reflect on some of those incidents, and I just don't stop, which I don't know if that's healthy or not healthy. But I think that's life. And I just continually look back at the decisions I made and one of the reasons I do that is to prevent myself from making the same mistakes I did in the past. I mean, that's why we study history. That's exactly why you study history, is not to repeat it.
So if you can constantly remind yourself, in essence, you're training yourself. You're creating some level of micro discipline to remind yourself of things that you've done in the past. So, Rich, I want you to kind of take it from here and talk about that. Can you train this?
I believe you can, although we have to understand that one of the key factors in all of this is emotion. All right, when we fail, we are bound to be highly emotional, and when we're emotional, what that means is our limbic is kind of overtaking more of our, overtaking our brain more than our frontal lobe or neocortex, our conscious ability to stop and effectively reflect. So reflection is actually based on, and the ability to effectively reflect is based on how emotional we are about what just happened. It is kind of critical to first understand one's emotions so that they may get to a place of effective reflection, because we've all been in the situations where we reflect too soon. We're still highly emotional about a situation, whether it was failure or something wrong or anything. And the reflection is just, it's kind of useless, right? We're coming up with stuff that either doesn't exist, but it's highly emotionally charged. And so I think the training comes to in effect when you can start to understand your emotional states in a more nuanced way, understand the physiology that goes into your emotional states. And once you're able to see or experience failures, challenges, small or large, but you can start with the small ones, practice the emotional side of it first, to try to get your emotions in check and get to the logical side of your brain that then allows you to ask logical questions about what just happens and begin that reflection process. Because, like Tom and Mike said, reflection is a critical key to this whole thing.
So, Tom, I'm interested in your thoughts because you served in Ranger Regiment, and you served in an organization that at times is built on emotion and keeping that emotion at a very high level where you need those operators to be revving at maximum capacity all the time, where failure is not an option at any point in anything that you do. And so how do you embrace that thought process of almost the humility? And I'll introduce the term humility here to take a step back and say, it's okay that I wasn't good enough today. If you operate in an organization where everything is about maximum capacity all the time.
Yeah. And that's a great point and great question. I think for me, going back to kind of one of your first questions, Fran, on is there an inflection point when we start to kind of notice these things? Really, it comes down to maturity. I mean, back when I was serving in Ranger Regiment, if a senior person started to criticize me or critique something I was doing internally, I would get emotional. I would get frustrated. I would say, what the hell does this person know? Looking back on it now as a more mature person who's still maturing, I was entirely wrong. I took offense to things, and I didn't realize that same leader that was criticizing me, that was critiquing what I was doing, was also critiqued and criticized early on in their career. So it was kind of a learning process and that maturation process, where eventually you kind of got to become a little more self-aware and look back and really understand where those criticisms are coming from, where those critiques, those failures, what's causing them, how you can fix them, and understand that, Ranger Regiment, one of the key things I took away from it, for example, is if you screw up, yeah, sure, somebody can make you do burpees and sprints for the next 4 or 5 hours, but oftentimes what would happen if you screwed up was a leader would pull you aside and make you go write a 10,000 word essay over the next 12 hours on what you did wrong, on how to improve what you did. And, a young person like myself would still get frustrated, annoyed, and take offense to that. But now looking back, it was so beneficial to me to have that kind of mentorship and leadership there, that I wish I would have been more self-aware in that moment. But again, that's what comes back to the maturation process. So I don't know if that really answers what you were asking there, but really it's maturity. That's, I think, the biggest thing.
I see Mike taking diligent notes over there, so I want to let him chime in here.
Yeah, let me throw this at you guys because I think this may help. And this just, I occasionally get like one good idea, but you guys might shoot this down and you're like, no, that's actually a horrible idea. What I'm about to say, you guys know, I'm repeating what we all know well. Let me flip the script for those listening. We've all heard of leadership capital, political capital, financial capital. I'm going to call this experiential capital. Failure is part of a life process. I remember my dad used to always say, sometimes knowing what not to do is as valuable as knowing what to do. How often in our special operations careers were we handed a problem set and everyone would look at each other and say, I have no clue how to tackle this. But what we did is we accumulated this bank of experiential, life failures. And it's basically, it becomes a process of elimination in your decision-making process. Over here, I've got this problem set. I don't know what to do, but because of all the failures I've had in life, I know don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. It leaves us with these 3 courses of action here. Let's test those. Let's red cell them and then identify which one probably gives us the highest probability for success. Does that make sense, or am I off there?
It makes total sense. You've silenced the group, so that means that you.
Rich, I let you down from the Navy standpoint.
I totally agree. It's we all talk about this this idea of failure, and so my belief is that we're actually wired to fail and move on. I mean, listen, anybody who's a parent out there, but even if you're not parents, I'll just pose a question. How long would you give your child to learn how to walk? How much time would you give it? What's the answer there? I mean, most people are like,
as long as it takes.
Yeah, what are you talking about? As long as it takes. That child's going to fall down many, many times as it learns to walk, right? And so even just in our process of life, we're experiencing, as we're going through this the growing and the maturation process, we're experiencing these bumps in the road, even as small children, and we're designed to kind of push through so that we get to the outcome. I think part of this idea of failing is, you're obviously failing at something that there's a projected outcome to achieve, and to kind of understand that part of the process, like Mike said, that part of the process is to fall. I mean, you can't learn how to ride a bike unless you fall off a couple times. It's inevitable, right? So if we understand that as part of the process, it becomes a lot more palatable to then say, or take accountability and actually look at failure as a kind of an honest assessment and kind of a forging element of whatever it is you're trying to do. So I think that's, again, it's a great conversation that kind of popped in as Mike was talking. So
what's the method? I mean, what's the method that you can use for that self-reflection?
So I think that came to me. I'll let me take a swing at it. So the methods to use. So I always talk about this concept about asking better questions. Okay, we're wired, and you guys have heard this before, and maybe some of the viewers have. But I'll just say it again because I think it's important. It's been an aspect of my life that I've experienced and done since high school. But our brains are wired to answer questions. Okay, our brains are constantly asking questions about our environment. That's how we understand our environment. Oftentimes it's unconscious. Okay, we're looking at the cup and our brain is bouncing that off of the hippocampus saying, have I seen this before, and all that stuff, right? Here's the deal though. When we actively take charge of asking questions, when we lodge a question into our frontal lobe, our brain immediately begins to come up with answers. Doesn't matter what that question is. And I do an experiment when I teach classes, and I ask the group, I say, I'm going to give you 30 seconds, and I want you to answer this question. How could you double your income in the next 6 months, right? You have 30 seconds, whatever pops in your head, go, right? And they start writing. They just start writing whatever pops in their head. At the end of 30 seconds, I say, count up the number of answers you have. And they do. And usually you get people with 3, 4, 5, 6, sometimes 7 answers in that 30 seconds, okay? The idea is it's not about the answers. It's about the fact that you lodged that question in your brain and you immediately you started to come up with answers. Your brain started to answer the question. So oftentimes we do this in the wrong way. We ask ourselves the wrong questions. Why am I so bad at this? Why are these people out to get me? Why does this always happen to me? Okay. As soon as you lodge that question into your frontal lobe, your brain begins to come up with answers, and most of them are disempowering and ridiculous. Okay. So the process of effective reflection, first, I believe, and I've done this for years, is to take charge of the questions that you lodge into your frontal lobe. Okay. Ask more empowering questions. Ask better questions. And I am convinced that the quality of our lives is directly proportional to the quality of the questions we consistently ask ourselves. So that's one tip I would say in terms of active reflection.
So I think I can build on that, Rich, because Ask Better Questions is about the entire fundamental basis in journalism. And in journalism, what are the questions that you need to ask? And the way that they frame what you're talking about is what, why, how. What happened? Why did it happen? How did it happen? And how do I develop a next step is something that you can always add on to that. And so if you're looking at an event, regardless of what it is, or you're trying to ask, better questions, the what, why, how actually digs into that to get you to that fine point. Tom?
Yeah. So I think for what I do for reflection, there's kind of two different things that come in. One's a manual, one's not. The first one is after I finish up a task or a project or anything in life that maybe I look back on and I think, okay, there's a lot of room for improvement here. Maybe it was a failure. Maybe it was a success. Who knows? Even if it's a success, it still requires reflection, I think. So what I typically do is I'll go to the gym and I'll work out for an hour, 2 hours, and I'll just constantly have nothing in my headphones and I'll just be thinking, replaying what we did. It's an AAR for me. What did I do? What can I do better? Where are my mistakes at? The other part of that is oftentimes having someone come in and criticize or point out issues. For me personally, in a work setting, when I make a mistake, if someone points it out to me or comes down on me for it, that's going to accelerate my motivation to fix it and get better. So it's kind of, that's where the manual, non-manual, involuntary reflection comes in for me. But back to what Rich just said, it's also kind of the basis of evolution, right? Like you make a mistake, you learn from it, you get better. That's the way it works in nature. An animal, not even when you're an animal, when you're a kid. When you're a kid, what do you do when you reach over and touch that fireplace and burn your hand? Okay, now I learned. I just failed at that task. I'm not going to touch that fireplace again. If you do, you're going to learn pretty quickly. You're going to keep burning your hand. Stop touching it. So I think what Rich is talking about also really just plays into the overall, factor of life, and that's evolution, constantly learning and relearning things. But a little bit of a tangent there. But Fran, does that answer your question?
It does. Mike, let's go to you. What's your method? You're on mute.
Can't even get the button. Right? God, the Navy is just hurting me today.
Immediate fail.
Tom, again, it's so funny. I've done this for years, but you just said it, and I recognize that I do it. When I go to the gym, I've got my my mean face on. I've got my beats on, and I'm focused on the workout. But what I'm actually doing during those workouts between sets is totally reflecting. That's why I get angry when people come up to me at the gym. Of course, I'm nice, but don't disrupt people at the gym. That's absolutely what I'm doing. It's sort of my informal process. You guys remember the people during after actions that had the green military notebooks out, writing down. Even after the after actions, they were still sitting at the table writing those out. I remember the greatest operators I ever served with had a volume, probably like 10 to 20 of those green notebooks throughout their careers, and they were writing. So in terms of a practical, and Nair hit it in our back chat here, is I found people that write or journal for as a personal habit tend to really reflect more and don't repeat the same mistakes. That works for me, but I think that is a lost art. You guys probably remember the people that had all those green notebooks in the profession. I see Rich smiling. Yeah,
I got two of them right here.
Well, and you bring up
just finished.
You bring up a great point about this idea of after action. Obviously a military thing. Other organizations do this as well, but it comes down to this ability to surround yourself with people who are trusted and actually are invested in yours and the team's success. And if you build a culture around that, then what you have is a group of people who, and again, some of these, and all of you could attest to this because we've all done these after action. Some of them were pretty brutal, but none of them were done in the vein of making someone feel bad. All of them were done in the vein of getting better. And because that was the culture, it was encouraged. You created a culture of encouragement for people to stand up. So I often tell businesses and teams who are asking about the kind of the after action report process. I said, if you build the right culture, then you don't oftentimes even need to point out the mistakes of another person, because that person knows exactly when they screwed up and how they screwed up, and they're going to stand up first and admit it, because the culture already supports that, and it makes everybody know. Everybody can learn from that failure. So kind of like Tom said, in the evolutionary sense, we're wired also to learn from other people's mistakes. If I don't have to burn myself on the fire if I just saw my brother or sister or dad burn his or herself on the fire, right? We're wired that's kind of a limbic empathy that's going on. So we're learning these lessons as well by seeing another person screw up, and that's helpful. If we can be more proactive in that accountability helps everybody, which is great.
Hey, Fran, really quickly. I know this term is thrown out a lot, but we've heard it within the last few years. Everyone wants to be a learning organization, which addresses the fact that, hey, as an organization, regardless of your domain, we're going to make mistakes. What truly matters is the AAR is not only a military. I know, like, people say military discipline. No, there's just discipline. The AAR, the after action review or debrief, hot wash, postmortem, is a technique or process used by learning organizations to not only develop the organization, but also their personnel as well. As Rich just said, we're sharing our mistakes. And when I talk to a lot of private sector companies, people are afraid to put their mistakes out there candidly and willingly for fear of retribution. Rich, the military, especially special operations, did a great job, and you guys know this, of in those after actions, which Rich said they could get pretty candid and heated. Everyone was trying to contribute to make the organization better, to learn from their mistakes, to make decisions, change processes and procedures if necessary in order to innovate and adapt and keep the organization moving down the road.
I want to dig into that a little bit more on the points, Mike, that you made, and also Rich, because the concept of the after action review has come up a bit in many of our discussions. And what I have found is that there's a big difference in how you conduct these debriefs or after action reviews in the military versus the corporate sector. And I say that because of the people who participate in them on your team. So it's very easy to some extent in the military to say you weren't good enough today, because by and large, the people in the organization, maybe they don't really have much of a choice, because tomorrow they're going to come back to that organization and they're going to do better, or they're going to be out. But in the corporate world, one of the things that we tend to forget is that you have a choice. You have a choice to be employed somewhere. And so often there becomes this sense of resentment that can be built within teams in organizations if you have the same people who are consistently not performing to the level of the expectation of their leader. And so how, as a leader, do you coach, teach, and mentor the people on your team who are not operating at the level of effectiveness that you expect from them, without building a culture of resentment where they're going to come in the next day and say, I just don't want to be here anymore and I'm out?
Yeah, I can jump in there, Fran. I think one thing I've seen, so it's interesting what Mike just pointed out about the AARs. I think since the military, I've helped out, advised, consulted with about 7 or 8 different startups. Not one of them did AARs in any way, shape, or form, and it's not because they're flawed or anything like that. It's just it had never come up. Nobody ever thought about it. I remember we implemented a postmortem process because nobody had just ever came forward and did it before. So I think what a lot of companies are doing, instead of doing that self-critical postmortem when a project fails or anything, whether it's a quarterly, weekly review, whatever, they're just doing a copy and paste a lot of times. They say, hey, we're really struggling at this process. And let's say they're in e-commerce and they say, well, you know what? Amazon does this. Let's just copy and paste that and it'll get better. You can't do that. You have to have that in detail postmortem AAR. And I think as a leader, when you're leading these postmortems, which is getting a little repetitive saying postmortem, so I apologize. But you have to be self-critical. If you as a leader come up and point out to your entire team, this is where you screwed up, you screwed up, you screwed up, you screwed up, but you don't give them the opportunity to tell you where you screwed up, or you don't want to bring up, hey, here's the mistakes I made and we need to fix them, then you're going to create that environment and that culture of resentment from your employees, because all they're going to hear is you're screwing up, I'm not. So I think that's one thing to definitely be aware of when you're doing these actions.
Let me hit a point. Mike just brought up in our private chat, and this is that these after action processes are not for when we fail. It's not just for when we fail, right? It's you do it all the time. Whether the operation went great or went horrible, you're going to do an AAR. Whether the training evolution went great or horrible, you're going to do an AAR. And I think the reason is in the intent, and the intent matters here. And I think this speaks to your previous question, Fran, about how do leaders in organizations out in the civilian world kind of implement this when there might be some issues and some hesitancy and things like that. Well, intent matters. Okay, the intent behind an AAR should be and is to get better, not to assign blame. And I think one of the problems with most organizations that try to embark upon an AAR process and they don't understand intent properly is that the people involved think and believe that the process is to assign blame, and perhaps the process is run in a way that it looks like you're trying to assign blame. But and as soon as you do that, by the way, no one will speak up, no one will hold themselves accountable. Everything will be dead silent, and you won't get anywhere. So the leader is ultimately in charge of that, right? The leader is the person who sets the tone, sets the intent, and makes sure that the reward system and the incentive system in an AAR process is congruent with getting better and not assigning blame.
Yeah. Fran, do you have anything to add? Or you want me to go ahead and jump in?
Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, just real quick, just to jump on what Rich said there as well. I think, the military and having played college athletics after the military, something I noticed was both of them are so good at scrutinizing wins and losses. So every single day after practice, we would come in and we watch film, or before practice, we watch film on where we screwed up. I might have had the best day ever at practice the previous day in football, but the coaches are still going to come in. They're going to point out, hey, your steps are off here. Hey, your release was bad here. Your form here was bad. And we criticize it and we go over it and we improve it. So that way the next time I might have another good practice, but I made incremental improvement. So I think it's really important to point out that businesses need to do that same thing. If you're if you have a big project going on that ends up being a financial success or what have you, it's still good to step back and say, okay, this was a success, but where can I get better? And you can look at any single leader out there, whether it's in the business world, whether it's LeBron James, Tom Brady, Michael Jordan, every single one of them is going to step away no matter how good they did. And they're going to focus on where they can still improve, no matter how perfect it might have seemed. So I think that's an important thing to highlight as well.
Hey, Fran, I want to give one example too, is we often see within companies, let's say sales doesn't hit their numbers and they do a quarterly sort of QRB and they do an after action and marketing wants to sit in it. Most companies are like, hey, no, this is sales. They don't want to share their failures and mistakes, and they silo the lessons learned. I remember when I was at SEAL Team 3, I don't know when this started, but with the global war on terror, before the global war on terror, joint warfare, the services working together wasn't at an all-time, it wasn't optimized. Let's put it that way. But if you guys remember, SOCOM started an after action where they would take points from the Army Special Forces, 75th Ranger Regiment, SEALs, MARSOC, Air Force Special Operations, and they would combine the best points into a document they turned out every week. I used to be excited, but the fact that a 75th Ranger Regiment troop commander was willing to share his lessons learned with a bunch of SEALs and Green Berets really showed that everyone was investing in the overall development of the organization, which at the time was the U.S. Special Operations community in the military. The point I'm trying to make here is you've got to create a culture where we want you to share your mistakes, even how embarrassing they may be. We're not going to pass judgment. We're all going to learn from it, and we're all going to improve.
Well, that culture of interdependency is really important in businesses. I mean, and it doesn't matter if the business is small, medium, or large. Every department is reliant upon every other department. I mean, I'll use the example of when I worked in global security. I mean, your job in global security is not there just to function as a security element. You're there to actually enhance the business. You're there to protect the interest of the business, which means that you actually interact with every single business line in every single facility, in every room that somebody actually occupies, in every employee. And so decisions that you make as a global security leader affect absolutely every single person in that organization. If you're building buildings, you work with the facilities and the construction team. And so every decision that gets made about a door, a locking mechanism, how people flow through those doors, all resonate across the entire organization. So you're not making those things in a bubble. So creating an interdependent web of communication between all different departments will enhance the organization in every single way. So,
Yeah.
Rick, go ahead.
No, sorry, Fran. Sorry.
Tom.
Just gonna jump in. One other thing I think that what you're kind of alluding to as well, that it's kind of a side factor of failure and being self-critical, is if you want to get those, I don't want to say criticism, that positive feedback, that negative feedback, whatever you can use to help you get better in your workplace, you have to really foster that culture of transparency in those relationships. So I work a lot with Asia in my current job. If I just reach out to somebody in APJ is what we call it, reach out to somebody in APJ and ask them, hey, where is this tool failing you at? Where can it get better at? Almost every time they will say, it's fine. And they won't give me any feedback. But if I reach out to that person beforehand, establish a little bit of a relationship, be informal with them, chit chat, get to know them a little bit. Okay, now it opens them up. They're much more willing to give me that feedback, tell me what I need to hear, not what I want to hear. So when you're talking about working with different departments, it's very important to create those cross-functional relationships in order to receive that honest feedback, because we can all be self-critical of ourselves and do our own after actions of our own processes. But it's really integral that we have people on the team and outside entities that are also willing to help us out, provide us with that feedback. And they're not going to do it oftentimes if you're not forming that relationship and fostering that culture of feedback.
So, Tom, let's talk about the positive. Let's talk about the successes, because we've talked a lot about the interdependency to learn from mistakes, right? When learning from other departments, things that have gone wrong. What about when you foster a community within your organization where you don't forget to highlight the other departments and their efforts when things go well in your world?
I think that's huge. That's a very important thing to establishing those relationships and really getting them to believe in you, understand who you are, and working together as a team. So it's I could probably just spout a bunch of yoga babble on that topic right now, but I think it's extremely important to highlight that. If the business development team is doing something that is positive for your team, reach out and let them know this is good. Let's monitor this. Let's make sure this continues. Let's make sure if it starts to fail, we can improve it again. So I think that's a very important part. I really just wanted to say the word yoga babble. I've been waiting to use it for a while, so I got it. And Mike, you're on mute.
Twice now.
I was going to say that this must be an Army thing because SEALs don't do yoga. We're jacking the weights in the gym. So I think when we're talking about gyms, we're talking about two different things. But
I don't
works for you, man. You do you.
I'm not going to pound on my chest or anything. I'll let that go.
Yeah, I think more SEALs are doing yoga than you think, Mike. I don't know. We're not in it anymore, so we don't know. I think this is a really good point, and it's a kind of I think a leadership tenet, and that is reward the behaviors you want to see more of, and they will start to foster. I mean, so I was just talking to a behavioral psychologist just yesterday. Actually, had a great conversation, and we were talking about this idea of learning and reward systems, and he brought up this point that kids, when kids are small, you can't necessarily punish them in the same ways. And he gave the example of his two kids who are twins, a brother and a sister, and they liked to, when they were 3 or 4 years old, like to stand up on their chairs at the dinner table, and of course they don't want that happening. The parents did not want that happening, and so his son would do that at the dinner table. But the problem with focusing on the son and saying, hey, sit down, is that the son, at that age, they just want attention, right? So they're doing it for some attention. So So the alternative is to look at his sister and say, I am so proud of you for sitting, down at the dinner table. You're such a good girl, and you can see out of the periphery, the boy sees that and then sits down because the boy wants to be rewarded too. So it's an example of human beings just, obviously I think it's a tenet that we will do more to avoid pain than we will to gain pleasure. However, if we reward the behavior we want to see more of, and really be specific about those rewards, we're gonna be able to reward more success and encourage that type of success and behavior, and encourage that type of culture, because that's how you build a culture.
So, Rich, we have to ask you about the 2-minute rule.
2-minute rule. Oh yes, okay. 2-minute rule. Mike knows this one. All right, one of our favorite COs taught us the 2-minute rule, and it was basically based on what his grandfather taught him, and this speaks to resilience, and so it's actually an effective way to kind of practice resilience. It goes like this: if anything bad happens, right? Whatever it is, you have 2 minutes to wallow, to feel sorry for yourself, to kind of kick the dirt, do whatever you want. And then after that 2 minutes, after the 120 seconds, you get back to it and you get back on track and you keep going. Same thing applies when something good happens. Okay. If something great happens, you have 2 minutes to pat yourself on the back, feel great about yourself, rest on your laurels, think you're the person, you're the man or the woman. Right. And after that 120 seconds, you get back to baseline and you keep going. So again, obviously there's challenges and things that happen that take more than 2 minutes to recover from. And there's obviously successes that you want to celebrate for a little bit longer than 2 minutes. But, in terms of practicing resilience, it's a really good way to kind of think about how to rebound and effectively get back on track. And again, as soon as you're effectively back on track, and that includes an ability to be somewhat emotionally attached from the situation, you are able to reflect. Okay, that's a perfect time to start reflecting. So that the 2-minute rule can be helpful.
Let me ask this to you guys, because again, I'm looking at the maturation process of this. Younger Mike loved the recognition. The chest would, well, back then I didn't have a chest. Would pop out a little, and I loved it. I don't know if it's a product. And I've been reflecting on this. I don't know if it's a product of the environment within the special operations community, to where I don't like recognition now. Like, if we succeeded at what we set out to do, I don't need the pat on the back. It actually I have an allergic reaction to it. I always look and I'm like, hey, great, we achieved mission success, but what could we have done better? And there's times, like, I don't know. Well, I'll tell you this. I think it became unhealthy. I remember one of my guys came to me and he said, you have this amazing ability to rob a victory from the guys. And he did not mean that as a compliment. What he said is, like, we do something good, and then I'd immediately look and, like, okay, what's the next ridgeline? Without allowing the guys a little period to celebrate. Maybe I didn't even give them those 2 minutes. What are your feelings, guys, on recognition now? And do you thrive off of it, being realistic?
That's a really good question, because I'm preparing some questions for an interview I have tomorrow, and I actually was just writing that down earlier for this question. Okay, because that's tough. Like, you've actually stumped me on this, because you want to say yes, right? You want to sit here and say, yes, I don't need any recognition for anything that I do, but I also think that's probably somewhat unrealistic to say that every single thing that I do, I'm only going to look at it and be very objective and say that I don't want someone to tell me that I did a good job, because you're human. Everybody's human. I mean, you want to be told and reinforced that you did something well. What I would say is that, why do you do it? Do I do things today so that someone will tell me that I did a good job? No. I do things today because I want to be impactful and I want to make a difference. And I do that for me. I do that because I want to give back. I want to empower people to become better versions of themselves. I want to see organizations thrive and succeed. And I want to be part of that after action review where we talk about all the good things we did very well, and the few things that we can capitalize on doing better next time. So I think it's the mindset by which you actually go into different projects and you go into different initiatives as you get older in life, and what are the driving factors behind that, versus when you're younger, where it's, I'm gonna do this act right now because someone's going to tell me that I did a good job. I think that goes out the window the older you get.
I want to hop in here real quick because I think, Fran, that was you really emphasized that point very, very well, and I want to kind of pile on a little bit because I want to. And Mike and I serve together, so I can tease him a little bit, because I think, Mike, you're fooling yourself if you don't think you were recognizing yourself for victories, right? You were just doing it in your own way. And this is what we have to recognize about ourselves and about ourselves as leaders. Leadership is not about us. Leadership is about other people. And what your guy told you in that moment was, hey, what you're doing for yourself is not working for us. Okay. And that's where we have to be very careful. I'm the same way in certain aspects, hey, the accomplishment of the mission, that felt great. I'm good. Right. That's all I need. Right. But some people need other things, and a lot of people need other things. And it's our job as leaders to understand those needs and to recognize. And I would say this, I have never, ever experienced any human beings, and we've done this kind of experiment in the leadership consulting and teaching we've done, but even in the military, every single person, it doesn't matter who you are, whether you're a tough guy Navy SEAL or a tough guy Ranger or whatever, okay, getting a pat on the back once in a while that says, hey, great job there, right? And oftentimes doing it a little bit publicly. It doesn't have to be very public. It can be just in front of the guys, right? It feels good, right? And I think that's important.
Yeah, Mike, I think for me, the first thing that pops in my head when you ask that question is ratios. I think everybody has a different ratio for critiques to praise. For me personally, I don't like to get praised a lot. I prefer to focus on where can I get better. So for me, it might be, 1 thumbs up to 10 thumbs down. That's kind of the ratio I like. For somebody else, it might be they need 2 thumbs up for every 1 thumb down. They're going to get discouraged. They're going to get disheartened. I think you really have to approach that mentality at a really individualistic level, because what motivates person A might demotivate person B. So for me, like I said, ratio is what comes into mind right now. I personally get uncomfortable with praise, but at the same time, every now and then, it's really good to have, because it keeps your confidence up. It lets you know, yeah, there's a lot of room for improvement, but I'm on the right track. But again, for somebody else, that 1 in 10 appraisal might, be demotivating for them, might make them think they're doing bad and might have them self-destruct. So I think that's an important piece. That's the first thing that came to my mind was those ratios.
Yeah. Hey guys, thanks for the feedback on that. I think you're absolutely right. Yes, every human, requires a bit of recognition. I think it changes over time, given the level you guys serve. When you're young, you want the recognition of your parents or your mentors or your coaches. And as you get older, especially being the bosses of your own company, there's no one above you to give recognition anymore. And I think your recognition really shifts to the people below you. And, there's nothing greater than when one of your subordinate leaders comes to you and says, hey, you've been a mentor to me. Oh, dude, my heart melts when I hear that. That's recognition. When I'm thinking about it, that I see now. But that's awesome.
So I think this is a good time to go to one of our junior leaders, Mike, and go to Naira and talk to her about her thoughts, what she takes away from the conversation. And I do have to say, before we turn it over, that she is doing a phenomenal job in this organization. Not only does she have to deal with you, Mike, every single day, but now she's been having to deal with me and getting my world up and going. And so I do have to praise her publicly in this forum for all of the tremendous work that she's doing. And the whole team there.
Thank you so much, Fran. And it's great to work with you, Mike. So and this discussion was really great because we really focused about why elite performers are so good on what they do, right? The answer is because they are honest with themselves, they hold themselves accountable, and they self-reflect. Fran commented how honesty allows you to realize that you're failing. And Tom added how when some people only focus on their successes, people forget that you can make the same mistake over and over. Secondly, Mike embraced the self-accountability concept. We all know that we will fail eventually. So accepting that it is part of the process already is a way to plan for when that failure happens. So hold yourself accountable when you fail because it will happen, and encourage yourself to continue your journey to reach your goal. Lastly, we explained how self-reflection has the power to analyze your past failures and modify activities accordingly for a new outcome. Rich explained that our brains are wired to respond questions, so you should ask better and more empowering questions. And those questions will help you develop better questions for yourself the more you train. And over time, your life will change depending on those questions that you have been asking. You should also remember to humble yourself and accept constructive criticism because nobody's perfect. And sometimes we're not able to notice our own mistakes. And I really do want to finalize with Rich's quote because it really impacted me today. And it's leadership is not about the leader. Leadership is about other people. I believe that a good leader takes its time to know the people around them individually and find what works for them to perform better and better each day.
Excellent. Thank you.
Very, very strategic of Naira. She dodged the big question. She
did.
Trying to avoid. So what is it, Naira? Who won? Navy or Army?
I can say that.
Say Air Force. You'll get it.
Air Force.
Option C or D. Marine Corps always wins. There you go.
All right. Well, we can't let it go without teasing the next episode. So I think, Mike, you got the next one, right?
Yes. Leaving when your, let's say, human resources team allows mediocrity within the organization, how do you deal with that? What are the symptoms? What are the causes? And then how do you deal with that and make organizational changes to make sure that you start attracting the right talent? What is it that every leader wants? And Crystal wrote about this in the book called Team of Teams, which most of the audience has probably heard of or read. Is he created the most decentralized command I think we've seen in the military in a long time. And as a leader, you ask yourself one question: do I have the right people in the right positions, solving problems at their level, taking ownership, or seizing opportunities? And if we're honest with ourselves, as we've talked about, you're never fully going to arrive at 100% decentralized command. Some amount of centralization is good, but we're going to talk about that mediocrity. It goes to the heart of the book, The Talent War: How Special Operations and Great Organizations Win on Talent.
All right. Excellent. Thank you. Yeah. Hope everybody will tune in. So I know I learned something. I do every time I sit down with this group. If you are honest with yourself, your organization, your teams, and you think you can do a little bit better, then feel free to give us a call. Hit us up online on social media, any one of us, or the talentwargroup.com. And we are happy to come out and work with you, your teams, your organizations, your individuals. We want to get better. We want you to get better. And we look forward to doing it together. And Mike, we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.